thing. I
Yes,
just have
please.
to tell your audience, because I've never shared this with anybody.
What is the true, ultimate cost of having it all? For decades, Catherine Zeta-Jones wasn't just a star. She was the impossible standard, the last remaining goddess of Hollywood. A flawless beauty, an Oscar winner, seamlessly married into cinematic royalty. She was celebrated, worshipped, and crowned a femme fatale. But in the merciless, unforgiving glare of the spotlight, that golden image was already beginning to shatter. She was the woman who possessed the staggering talent, the generational beauty, and a public love story that felt meticulously plucked from a script. Yet, away from the cameras, she was quietly, secretly unraveling. What was the deeply hidden, decades-long trauma that drove a woman at the absolute peak of power to suddenly step away, to vanish into a chosen, calculated silence? This is not the glossy surface story of her success. This is the unspoken, haunting tragedy of her very survival. And once you truly understand the relentless, unforgiving price she ultimately paid, you will never look at her the same way again. Before the dazzling gowns and the unrelenting Hollywood glow, Catherine was a girl on a treacherous, high-tension wire. She grew up in a small, perpetually rainy corner of Swansea, Wales. Her parents, a candy factory manager and a seamstress, weren't wealthy. When they pulled together every available spare penny to enroll her in a local performing arts school, that single act of sacrifice was not a simple gift. It was a lifelong binding contract. From her earliest childhood, she internalized the terrifying, paralyzing pressure that if she ever failed, if she simply stumbled, she would be completely wasting their last desperate hope. This wasn't a childish dream. It was an immense, toxic responsibility carried on small shoulders, which was only compounded by weeks confined indoors, battling brutal, draining respiratory illness. This early forced isolation didn't crush her, it sharpened her. It forced her into a private world of old Hollywood films where she meticulously studied the legends, training herself for a destiny that few in her town predicted, and even fewer outsiders ever truly understood. By the time she was a sharp, ambitious teenager, she wasn't living a normal life. She was constantly, exhaustingly performing. She missed her childhood, sacrificed her normal teenage years, and deliberately trained her inner turmoil to serve her burning, desperate ambition. This fear of failure, this constant driving need to meticulously justify the cost, became the invisible, overused motor of her career, a psychological engine that was destined to eventually overheat and burn her out completely. But the relentless pressure to maintain this impossible perfection would only intensify, becoming a crushing weight once she finally hit the absolute heights of the big screen. When she first arrived in London, the industry didn't know how to categorize her. She was simply too striking, too worldly, and not considered American enough for the biggest lead roles. Her staggering, undeniable beauty, which should have been her greatest undeniable asset, instead became a severe, double-edged sword. Casting directors simply couldn't look past the glamorous packaging. They assumed she lacked depth. They wanted her to be sweet, silent, and harmless, but Catherine had an inner volcanic fire she was desperate to unleash. She faced brutal rejection again and again, often because agents and producers deemed her too intimidating to be a passive leading lady or too exotic for mainstream appeal. It took years of fighting for thankless, tiny roles, of struggling to survive alone in the brutal anonymity of Los Angeles, to finally land the role that would change everything, The Mask of Zorro. The film didn't just launch her career, it violently redefined her, morphing her into the dangerous, capable, and profoundly seductive figure she always knew she was. Suddenly, the scripts flooded in. The roles became Oscar-worthy, and the most dominant star in the world, Michael Douglas, came calling. What followed wasn't just a whirlwind marriage. It was a global, spectacular acquisition, a reported $25 million wedding, and a 25-year age gap that instantly put her under the highest, most invasive scrutiny imaginable. The world didn't just see a couple, they saw a financial and celebrity union of epic legends. But this ultimate trophy, this perfect life, came with a crushing, emotional cost that went far beyond the spotlight. The public adoration was about to demand a price that would almost destroy her from the inside out. By the early 2000s, Catherine was at the absolute untouchable zenith of fame. But the golden, dazzling glow of her Oscar for Chicago obscured a crippling, silent anxiety that was consuming her. The external pressure was relentless, unforgiving, and absolute. Every subsequent role had to be better than the last, every red carpet gown had to be flawless, and every minute subtle detail of her marriage to the elder statesman, Michael Douglas, was meticulously scrutinized by a ravenous global media. The world expected a seamless goddess, but behind the heavily guarded closed doors, Catherine was battling a silent, escalating psychological toll of having to constantly, exhaustingly outshine her previous success. Her career became an all-consuming, high-stakes game of endurance. Then came the life-altering, devastating crisis. When Michael Douglas was diagnosed with a form of throat cancer linked to HPV, the entire focus of the world shifted entirely and brutally to his medical battle. Catherine, who had always been the tightly wound, driven professional, was suddenly and forcefully cast into the impossible role of the immovable, unyielding rock. She stood by him through grueling chemotherapy, continued to maintain her high-profile career, and raised two young, vulnerable children. While the public justly showered her with immense praise for her steadfast devotion, few in the media ever stopped to ask the crucial question: how was she doing? She dedicated every last ounce of her emotional, physical, and mental energy to keep her husband and her young family afloat, essentially erasing her own emotional identity to ensure he remained anchored. She was, by all accounts, a perfect caretaker, a perfect mother, and a perfect wife. But the human being beneath the gilded, flawless facade was running dangerously on empty, suffering in a profound, toxic silence. Her ultimate, public act of love, her devotion to her husband, ultimately became the insidious, silent catalyst for her own complete psychological collapse. The truth that finally and violently shattered the illusion of perfection was brutal, and in Hollywood, it was treated like an act of betrayal. After years of selfless caretaking, of shouldering the emotional weight of a global star and his illness, and of running on absolute empty, Catherine's own mind began to violently rebel. The constant strain, the simmering fear, and the paralyzing, suffocating pressure of being the perfect, flawless star finally pushed her beyond the edge of endurance. In 2011, the headlines screamed a truth she had battled privately for years. Catherine Zeta-Jones hospitalized for bipolar II disorder. It was a diagnosis of intense, cyclical mood swings, marked by severe depressive lows and manic highs, and in a town that worships total, absolute control. It was instantly branded as an unforgivable, exploitable weakness. She had sought treatment privately and with quiet courage, but the public announcement was an instant, vicious, career-ending scandal. Tabloids ruthlessly mocked her fragility. Film offers dried up almost overnight. Major studios and directors publicly questioned her reliability and stability. The internal whispers and external speculation grew so loud, so toxic, that her own marriage finally cracked under the immense strain, leading to a temporary, painful separation from Michael Douglas in 2013. The media pounced on the details of her public meltdown with brutal glee, treating her pain as entertainment. The very industry she had poured her body, soul, and sanity into for decades was now viciously turning its back on the girl who dared to show a single human flaw. She finally realized the painful, crushing truth. She had fought for decades to meticulously become everything Hollywood wanted. And when she needed empathy and understanding the most, the town only offered her public shame and professional abandonment. But as her global fame finally began to crumble under its own weight, a necessary, difficult path to a profound and lasting peace finally opened up before her. Having endured and survived the very worst, most invasive aspects of Hollywood, Catherine made a deliberate, almost revolutionary choice. She became a ghost to the industry. She had successfully conquered the world, only to realize that the real, authentic prize was the fundamental human right to deliberately disappear from the public eye. She and Michael moved their family from the relentless glare of Los Angeles to a quiet, private estate outside of New York City, choosing authentic, internal peace over the superficial spectacle of a premiere. She completely stopped chasing major film roles and instead immersed herself in studying interior design, focusing entirely on creating a life not for the camera, but purely for her own sanity and fulfillment. She channeled her formidable drive into launching a private, luxury lifestyle brand and into tending her garden, activities that brutally demanded authenticity, human connection, and presence, not performance or pretense. This intentional, strategic fading from the spotlight was her ultimate, most defining act of rebellion against the fame machine. She no longer chased relevance. She chased quiet. Her marriage, too, underwent a necessary, fundamental rebirth. They eventually reunited, not out of any need for image control, but out of a shared, deep understanding of battle scars and survival. She began speaking openly and candidly about her bipolar diagnosis, not with any sense of shame, but with fierce, unapologetic pride and powerful clarity, declaring publicly that she lives with it and that she will not be diminished or defined by it. The woman who returned to the rare stage wasn't the sexy, mysterious femme fatale. She was the truth-teller, the honest survivor who had found something infinitely more valuable than a golden statue. Catherine Zeta-Jones didn't just come back to Hollywood, she decisively came back to her truest, most authentic self. The little girl from Wales who once battled relentless loneliness and devastating illness finally understood that her greatest strength wasn't her effortless grace or her famous beauty. It was her unyielding, stubborn endurance. She stared down the deafening applause, the profound loneliness, the intense fame, and the very public fall, and emerged scarred, weathered, but profoundly, beautifully unbroken. Her journey is a profound, necessary reminder that tragedy doesn't always have to roar with spectacle and public screams. Sometimes it lives quietly, silently, behind the most beautiful, perfect smile, beneath the most velvet of gowns, right in the heart of the life that everyone else on earth envies. And perhaps her greatest, most resonant achievement wasn't simply winning the Oscar, but having the fundamental courage to walk completely away from the illusion it represented. She proved, through her quiet survival, that you are absolutely enough, even when you are no longer perfect. Don't forget to like this video. Subscribe to the channel. We drop raw, emotional news every single day that dig deeper than the headlines. and hit the comments. We all want to hear your opinion. Your voice matters here.